He thought he'd lost a priceless watch. What he found was a boy with a backpack, a powerful lesson, and the family he never knew he needed. When billionaire Grayson Wells met Aiden and little Toby, a simple act of honesty would unlock a legacy far greater than fortune. Before we begin, leave a comment below and let us know where you are watching from so we can say hello. Now, let's get into the story. The city was unusually quiet for a Thursday afternoon. A warm breeze rustled the trees in Central Park, and the golden light of the setting sun streamed through the branches like soft spotlights on the worn cobblestone path. Billionaire investor Grayson Wells, 45, wasn't used to such stillness. His world was usually filled with ringing phones, ticking clocks, and voices echoing across glass conference rooms. But today, after a grueling 6-hour board meeting that left even him weary, Grayson decided, without warning or assistant scheduling, to walk. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his polished shoes crunched lightly on the gravel as he walked with his hands behind his back. He passed joggers, nannies with strollers, and couples curled up on benches, but he barely registered them. His mind was elsewhere, on a merger that had stalled, on quarterly returns, on the silence that now filled his penthouse each night. As he reached a familiar bench beneath a large elm tree, he sat down with a long sigh. For a moment, Grayson let his shoulders drop, the mask of power slipping ever so slightly. He glanced down at his wrist to check the time. 3:42 p.m. Or so he thought. The watch was gone. Grayson blinked. His wrist was bare. He stood abruptly, heart pounding. He spun around, scanned the ground, then checked his briefcase and his coat pockets. Nothing. The familiar weight that had been a constant presence for years was simply missing. It wasn't just any watch. It was a Patek Philippe, custom-made, gifted by his father when Grayson took over the company. Engraved on the back were the words, "Don't waste time. Earn it." His father's motto, one Grayson had lived by for decades. Losing it wasn't just about its 7-figure value, it was losing a part of his past. His breath quickened as panic began to rise. Had someone stolen it while he walked? Had it slipped off when he paused to answer that email? 1,000 possibilities swirled in his mind. For a man who built empires by controlling outcomes, this randomness was maddening. He retraced his steps in his mind. The meeting. The car ride. The walk in the park. He had sat down on that wooden bench by the old oak tree, the one just past the duck pond. He had glanced at the time before checking messages. That was it. That had to be where it happened. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat, snatched a small tactical flashlight from the drawer near the door, and headed back down to the street. The driver looked startled when Grayson insisted on walking. "Sir, I can drive you." "No time." "Stay here," Grayson barked, already moving at a near run-down 5th Avenue toward Central Park. The evening crowd had thinned, and the city was shifting into its night rhythm. Streetlights flickered on, their pools of light barely reaching the darker corners of the park. Grayson moved quickly, sweeping the beam of his flashlight across the grass and under every bench. His shoes crunched against fallen leaves and scattered gravel. The deeper he went, the more desperate he felt. This wasn't about losing something expensive, he could replace that in a phone call. This was about losing the one thing that still tethered him to his father, a man whose stern voice and quiet wisdom had guided him more than he cared to admit. He reached the bench, the same one he'd sat on earlier that day. He crouched, sweeping the flashlight underneath, around, behind. Nothing. "Damn it," he muttered, fingers trembling as they sifted through patches of dirt and damp grass. A jogger passed and gave him a strange look, but he didn't care. His breaths came fast now, fogging in the cool air. His pulse thudded in his ears. Just as he began to stand up, something caught the light in the distance. Just ahead, near a cracked wooden bench beneath a towering oak tree, something stirred. Grayson slowed. His breath caught when he saw them, two small figures barely visible in the shadows. One was crouched over an old, worn-out backpack, his thin frame curled protectively around it. The other, a smaller child, sat cross-legged beside him, dozing lightly with his head against his brother's shoulder. Grayson approached cautiously, not wanting to frighten them. As he drew closer, the older boy turned his head sharply, alert but calm. He couldn't have been more than 10, skinny, with shaggy hair and dirt smudges on his cheeks. His eyes were sharp, too old for his age, filled with something Grayson recognized but hadn't seen in years, quiet resilience. "Hey there," Grayson said gently, crouching a few feet away to meet the boy at eye level. "I'm not here to hurt you. I lost something. A watch. I think it might have fallen somewhere around here." The older boy flinched but didn't run. His dark eyes locked onto Grayson's, wary yet steady. The younger one buried his face into his brother's shoulder, trembling slightly. There was a long pause. The older boy shifted his weight and looked down at the backpack, then back at Grayson. "What kind of watch?" he asked, voice soft but firm. Grayson lowered himself to their level, kneeling slowly. "It's round, with a brown leather strap," he replied. "Gold face. It means a lot to me." The older boy studied him, then slowly turned to his backpack. With deliberate care, he reached for the zipper. Grayson noticed how his small fingers trembled, not with fear, but from the cold. The boy pulled it open and gently reached inside. From within the frayed bag, he drew out a sock, rolled carefully. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing the unmistakable glint of polished gold. Grayson's breath caught. It was his watch. The boy didn't offer it immediately. Instead, he placed it in his lap, his fingers still resting lightly on it. "I was going to bring it to the police," he said. "But we didn't know if they'd believe us." The younger boy peeked up from his brother's side, his face smudged but curious. He pointed at the watch. "He wrapped it so it wouldn't get scratched," he whispered, proudly. Grayson stared at the two boys. Despite their ragged clothes and dirt-streaked cheeks, they hadn't run, hadn't hidden, and hadn't tried to pawn what could have fed them for weeks. "Why didn't you sell it?" Grayson asked quietly, more to understand than accuse. The older boy finally replied softly, "Mom always said, never take something that isn't yours, no matter how much you need it." Grayson blinked, stunned by the simplicity of it. That sentence hit harder than any business loss or betrayal he'd ever known. His watch, his father's legacy, had been found by a homeless child, and not only had the boy kept it safe, he hadn't once considered trading it for survival. "Your mom sounds like a good woman," Grayson murmured, swallowing the lump forming in his throat. "She is," the boy replied, gently zipping the backpack closed again. "She's sick right now, but she's still good." There was a long silence between them. The city noises faded, honking cars, distant sirens, dogs barking, as if the whole world had paused for that single moment. "What's your name?" Grayson asked. "I'm Aiden." "This is my brother, Toby," the older boy said. Toby gave a small wave, then leaned into his brother's side, yawning. Grayson looked at them, truly looked. The brothers' clothes were threadbare, their sneakers too small, faces smudged with dirt, but their spirits were intact. These weren't just two lost kids in the park. They were two boys carrying something invisible but powerful, integrity. And here he was, a billionaire surrounded by walls, assistants, and deals, completely disarmed by two children who had nothing but a broken backpack and a mother's lesson. He reached out, gently resting a hand on Aiden's shoulder. "Thank you for keeping it safe," he said. "You did the right thing. Your mom would be proud." Aiden looked away, blinking fast. "I hope so." Grayson's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he say that wouldn't sound condescending or empty? He was a billionaire, a man whose name was etched on skyscrapers, whose time was worth more than most people's yearly income. But in this moment, kneeling on wet concrete, looking up at a boy who had every reason to take what he found and run, he felt small. A soft sound pulled his attention downward. Toby had stepped forward, lifting his hand shyly to offer Grayson a crumpled tissue. "You look sad," he said innocently. That broke him. Grayson smiled through the sting in his eyes and took the tissue with both hands. "Thank you," he said softly, voice rough with emotion. I forgot how to cry." Aiden's expression shifted. The caution didn't vanish, but something gentler stirred behind his eyes. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. A man who understood loss. A man willing to listen. And under that flickering street lamp, with a priceless watch in a child's battered bag and the night stretching long and uncertain ahead, something changed in Grayson Wells, a crack in his armor, a spark in the dark. He hadn't just found his watch. He'd found something far more valuable. Grayson Wells crouched beside the small boy with the frayed backpack, his mind still reeling from the boy's quiet but powerful response, "My mom said never take what doesn't belong to you." That alone had been enough to shatter something in him. But what the boy said next shook him even deeper. "We don't really stay in one place," the boy said, hugging the backpack tighter to his chest. "We move around, a lot." Grayson tilted his head, studying the boy's tired eyes and smudged cheeks. "What do you mean, son?" Aiden glanced around the park, lowering his voice. "You can't sleep too deeply here. People will take your stuff, sometimes worse. If I stay up, Toby can sleep. Then I'll nap when the sun comes up and people walk their dogs. It's safer then. Toby is 5 and his sister is 5. We take turns staying up. My mom used to, but she's too sick now." Grayson sat back slowly, feeling the full weight of Aiden's words sink into his chest like wet cement. A child, no more than 10, was guarding his younger brother at night because he had no home to protect him. "Where are your parents now?" he asked gently. Aiden swallowed. "Dad left before Toby was born. We haven't seen him since. Mom, she got sick last winter. She worked as a waitress at a diner, but when she collapsed during her shift, they let her go. We couldn't pay rent, and we got evicted." Aiden spoke like someone far older than his years. Every sentence carried the weight of too many responsibilities, too many nights without sleep, and too many things he shouldn't have had to understand. Grayson looked again at Toby, whose tiny chest rose and fell steadily under the thin blanket. "Do you sleep in this park every night?" Aiden shook his head. "We switch spots. Sometimes behind the old church on 5th Street. Sometimes in that broken-down bus near the docks. We try not to stay too long in one place so no one notices us." There was no self-pity in Aiden's voice, only caution, resilience, and a desperate, quiet pride. "We used to have a place. It wasn't big. But Mom always kept it clean. She'd cook pasta and we'd eat on a little table that wobbled. She used to sing while folding laundry. Toby liked that." Grayson felt something twist inside him. These were things he hadn't thought about in years: warm kitchens, mothers singing, the smell of real food. Aiden's voice brought those memories back, fragile and haunting. "What about school?" Grayson asked softly. "We haven't gone since February," Aiden admitted. "Mom said not to worry, that once she gets better, we'll go again. I still read when I can. Sometimes I find old books in those free boxes outside libraries. I read them to Toby at night when he's scared." Grayson didn't know what to say. This boy, barely 10, was a protector, a teacher, a brother, and a caregiver. All while carrying a broken backpack and a burden far too heavy for his age. "Why didn't you sell the watch?" Grayson asked again, almost in a whisper, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it once more. Aiden's fingers tightened on the backpack. "Because it's not mine. Just because no one's watching doesn't make stealing right. And, If I lost something that special, I'd hope someone would bring it back. Toby nodded solemnly beside him, then whispered, Mom would be proud of us, right? Grayson's chest tightened as he looked at the brothers, two boys in threadbare clothes, their shoes too small or too big, their hair unwashed, their innocence still intact. He couldn't look away from the way Aiden stood protectively in front of Toby, one hand slightly in front of his little brother's chest like a shield. Or the way Toby kept glancing at Aiden to copy his every movement, his faith in his big brother absolute. They reminded him of something. Of someone. Of himself, maybe, back before the world taught him that kindness was a weakness and emotions were liabilities. He didn't know when he had started to drift from that version of himself. Perhaps it had been after his father died, or after the boardroom betrayals piled up and forced him to harden. All he knew was that somewhere along the way, the boy who once believed in doing good had turned into a man who only believed in winning. But standing in front of Aiden and Toby, two children who had every reason to give in to desperation but hadn't, Grayson felt something shift. Deep in his gut. Something long buried and almost forgotten. His voice cracked when he spoke again. What's in the backpack besides the watch? Aiden blinked, surprised by the question. Just stuff. Some clothes. A book. And a picture of Mom. Toby unzipped his front pocket and proudly pulled out a crumpled photo. Grayson reached out slowly, touching the edge of the photograph with 2 fingers. It was faded but still clear, a smiling woman holding both boys, years ago, when things must have been better. There was strength in her eyes. The same kind of strength that now lived in Aiden's voice. He cleared his throat and stood up, brushing his hands against his coat even though there was no dirt on them. The emotion in his chest felt foreign, like a knot he couldn't untangle. He hadn't cried in 20 years. Not at his father's funeral. Not when he made his first billion. But in that moment, something warm and sharp crept up behind his eyes. I'm not mad, Grayson said gently. I'm grateful. Aiden and Toby stared at him in silence, unsure what to make of that. But Grayson wasn't looking for their understanding. He had found his own. For the first time in years, his heart didn't feel like a locked vault. It felt confused. Stirred. And maybe, just maybe, alive again. Now, Grayson stood still as he looked at Aiden, then down at the smaller boy beside him, his younger brother, Toby, 5 years old, with an innocent face and holding his brother's hand so tightly that there was no room for doubt. They were close. They were surviving together. You boys eaten tonight? Grayson asked gently, his voice softer than usual. Aiden looked up, his face guarded. We had some crackers earlier. Grayson nodded, considering. There's a diner a few blocks from here. Open all night. Real food. Hot food. He paused. Can I take you? For a moment, no one moved. The rain from earlier had dampened the air, and the chill settled deep. Grayson could see the hesitation in Aiden's eyes, the gears turning behind those cautious glances. It wasn't fear of him, but fear of what accepting kindness might mean. Fear of disappointment. Of trust being broken again. Aiden's eyes flicked to Toby, who looked up at his brother as if waiting for instruction. Then back to Grayson. What about Toby? Aiden asked warily. Of course, Grayson said. Both of you. Aiden looked down at his backpack, the small, battered thing with frayed edges and a zipper that barely closed. His hands clutched the straps like they were stitched into his skin. He didn't answer right away. Grayson could see the war in the boy's mind. Survival had taught him that kindness had conditions. That nothing came free. That anything offered could be taken away. Then came the softest whisper, almost drowned by a gust of wind. Only if I can bring it, Aiden said. His hands were white-knuckled now on the bag. My backpack. Grayson's throat tightened unexpectedly. He didn't know what was in that bag, other than the watch. But he suddenly understood it was more than belongings. It was a vault of everything Aiden had left, maybe a photo, a note from his mother, food scraps, or Toby's only toy. That bag was a lifeline. Absolutely, Grayson replied without hesitation. You can bring anything you want. Aiden stared at him for a few seconds longer, as if measuring the man in front of him not by his wealth or his clothes but by something deeper. Finally, he gave a slow nod. Okay, he said. He turned to Toby and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. We're going to eat, buddy, he whispered, and Toby's eyes lit up, not with excitement, but relief. A warm meal was more than food. It was hope. Grayson led them toward his sleek black SUV parked along the curb. The car looked out of place against the backdrop of boys in threadbare clothes, but he opened the door without fanfare. As Aiden helped Toby climb in, he clutched the backpack tightly to his chest and sat close beside his brother, never letting the bag or the child out of his arms. Grayson slid into the driver's seat but paused for a moment before starting the engine. He glanced at them in the rearview mirror, the worn shoes, the way Aiden positioned himself like a shield in front of Toby, the way both sat rigid, unsure if this was a trick. But Grayson wasn't playing a game. He looked forward again and turned the key. I know a place with pancakes, he said lightly, trying to ease the tension. Pancakes? Toby whispered. With syrup? Grayson smiled, the first genuine one he'd worn in days. All the syrup you want. And for the first time that night, Aiden's shoulders dropped ever so slightly. Not all the way, not yet. But enough. Enough to mean something had changed. They drove into the night, not just to a diner, but toward something neither of them could name yet. Something like trust. Something like a beginning. The yellow neon lights of the all-night diner buzzed softly, casting a gentle glow across the rain-speckled windows. It was nearly midnight when Grayson Wells pulled his sleek black SUV into the lot, the hum of the engine fading into the quiet hum of the city that never truly slept. Inside, the place was mostly empty, save for a lone trucker nursing his coffee and an elderly waitress behind the counter reading a dog-eared novel. Grayson opened the door and held it open for the two boys following closely behind him, Aiden, 10 years old with cautious eyes and a protective arm around his 5-year-old brother, Toby. The warmth of the diner embraced them, a stark contrast to the night chill they had been walking through. Grayson gestured toward a booth in the back, away from the windows, and let the boys slide into the red vinyl seats. Aiden helped Toby up first, making sure the little boy was comfortable, before sitting beside him. Grayson took the opposite seat, quietly studying the way Aiden wrapped his arm around his brother instinctively, like a parent instead of a child. A waitress ambled over, eyebrows raised slightly at the odd trio. You folks want menus? 3 cheeseburgers, fries, and 2 chocolate milks, Grayson said without hesitation. He paused. And coffee. Black. The waitress scribbled it down and nodded. Coming right up. As soon as she left, Aiden looked across the table, his fingers nervously fidgeting with a string hanging from his sleeve. You don't have to buy us food, he said quietly. We're used to skipping. No one should be used to that, Grayson replied. His voice was even, but his chest felt tight. Toby, still wide-eyed, whispered, Are the burgers big? They're huge, Grayson said with a soft smile, something unfamiliar tugging at his mouth. When the food arrived, the boys didn't speak. Aiden passed one plate to Toby, who began eating slowly, savoring every bite like it was the last meal he'd ever have. Aiden, on the other hand, practically devoured his burger, his hunger outweighing his hesitation. He paused only to help Toby with the straw and his chocolate milk, wiping his brother's chin with a napkin like their mother must have once done. Grayson didn't eat. He watched. He watched the way Aiden positioned himself so Toby wouldn't fall from the booth, the way he kept one eye on his brother while taking frantic bites, like he couldn't risk letting his guard down even for a second. This boy wasn't just surviving, he was shouldering the weight of someone else's survival too. For a moment, the silence was filled only with the clatter of cutlery and the hum of the overhead lights. Then Aiden looked up. "Why'd you take us here?" he asked, his voice low, suspicious, but not angry. Grayson leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. "Because you gave something back that didn't belong to you. And that matters." Aiden blinked. "A lot of people wouldn't care." "I care," Grayson said simply. "That watch, it was a gift from my father. He passed away 5 years ago. It's one of the only things I have left that connects me to him." Aiden glanced down at his hands. "I figured it was important. Toby found it under the bench. He thought it was a toy. I told him it wasn't ours to keep." Grayson's gaze flicked to Toby, who was now licking ketchup off his fingers with childlike innocence. "You're a good brother." Aiden shrugged. "Mom says it's my job to look after him. Especially now that she's sick." Grayson nodded slowly. He wanted to ask about their mother, but something told him not to push. "Not yet. I don't talk to people much," Aiden added, his voice softening. "Most grown-ups either ignore us or tell us to move along." Grayson leaned back, eyes fixed on the boy. "I don't talk to people much either." Aiden tilted his head. You look like someone who talks all the time." Grayson chuckled for the first time that night. "I talk in boardrooms. On phone calls. At conferences. But that's not real talking. That's business." "What's real talking, then?" Aiden asked. "This," Grayson said, gesturing between them. "This is real." There was a pause, and then Aiden nodded, like he understood something deeper than his age should have allowed. Toby, now full, curled up against Aiden's side and rested his head on his brother's chest. Aiden gently ran a hand through Toby's messy hair, his other hand still resting protectively on the edge of the table. Grayson watched them with a lump rising in his throat. For all the power, money, and influence he had acquired, he suddenly realized how poor he was in one particular currency: connection. These two boys, living with nothing, had more of it than he ever did. "Do you miss your dad?" Aiden asked quietly. "Yes," Grayson said, voice rough. "I do." Aiden nodded. "I don't remember mine much. He left when Toby was a baby." "Then your moms raised you both alone?" Aiden hesitated, then nodded. "She worked 2 jobs until she got sick. Then we lost the apartment. We've been moving around a lot. Sleeping where we can. I try to keep Toby warm, but sometimes it's hard." Grayson looked down, his jaw tight. "You shouldn't have to go through that." "No kid should," Aiden said simply. Grayson stared at him, stunned by the weight of the boy's words. This wasn't just a lost child. Aiden was more adult than most of the men he dealt with every day. "I want to help," Grayson said. "Not just with dinner. With everything." Aiden didn't respond right away. He looked down at Toby, who was now dozing peacefully. Then he looked back up. "Just, don't lie to us," he whispered. "I won't," Grayson promised. The booth fell quiet again. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under streetlights like silver veins, leading somewhere new. As Grayson paid the bill, he glanced back at the booth one last time. Aiden had his arms around his brother, their small bodies huddled together, finding warmth not in money, but in each other. Something inside Grayson shifted. He had come to find a watch. Instead, he had found purpose. Grayson stood silently by the curb as Aiden, the 10-year-old boy who had returned his precious watch, shifted his weight nervously beside him. In one hand, Aiden clutched his tattered backpack, still protectively zipped shut. In the other, he held the smaller hand of his 5-year-old brother, Toby, who had been trailing behind ever since they left the diner. Toby looked up at Grayson with big, wary eyes, his cheeks pink from the cold. His jacket was too small, the sleeves falling well above his wrists, and the soles of his sneakers had begun to peel. But he didn't complain, not once. He just squeezed Aiden's hand and kept walking. Grayson's chest tightened as he followed them up the chipped steps of a building in the Bronx. The hallways were narrow, the walls stained with age and neglect. The air smelled faintly of mildew and oil. It was the kind of place Grayson had only ever seen in news reports or gritty films, never in real life. Never with children leading him inside. Aiden reached a door marked 2B and fished a bent key out of his sock. He gave Grayson an apologetic look before unlocking it. "It's not much," he muttered. Grayson didn't respond. He just stepped in slowly, blinking against the sudden change in light. The apartment was barely more than a single room. A mattress without sheets lay against the far wall. Beside it, a pile of old clothes had been arranged like a makeshift dresser. There was no table, no couch, no decorations. Just a hot plate on a crate in the corner, a cracked window covered with an old sheet, and silence. Then came the cough. It was low at first, then violent, rattling the walls. Grayson turned toward the source and saw her. Elena. She was curled on the mattress, her skin pale, her face gaunt. Her dark hair, once thick and wavy, clung to her forehead with sweat. She wore 2 sweaters, neither thick enough, and her hands trembled as she struggled to sit up. Aiden rushed over, setting down his backpack and kneeling beside her. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I brought someone." Elena's eyes fluttered open. She tried to speak but coughed again, grabbing her chest as her body shook. Grayson stepped closer, slowly, unsure if she would recognize him, or even want to. "Elena," he said gently. She looked up, blinking in disbelief. "Mr. Wells?" Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Is that really you?" He nodded. His voice caught in his throat. "Yeah. It's me." Elena tried to sit up straighter, pushing herself up with trembling arms. "I'm sorry," she said, embarrassed. This isn't how I thought we'd meet again." "You shouldn't be apologizing," Grayson said quickly. "I should be. All of this." He looked around the room, the emptiness, the cold, the desperation tucked between every corner. This wasn't just about a lost job anymore. It was about what his company, his choices, had cost her, and her children. "How long have you been here?" he asked quietly. Elena's eyes drifted toward Aiden and Toby, who had now curled up beside her, trying to keep her warm with their small bodies. "Almost 2 years," she whispered. "After I got laid off, it all went downhill so fast. I tried temp jobs, but my health started failing. Aiden's been doing his best." At that, Grayson turned to the boy. Aiden stared at the floor, shoulders stiff. "I didn't want to tell anyone," he said, barely audible. "I thought if people knew, they'd take us away from her. And she needed us." Grayson walked over and knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "You shouldn't have had to carry all of that," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You're just a kid." Aiden didn't reply, but his shoulders finally relaxed under Grayson's hand. Toby leaned his head on his mother's arm and spoke softly. "We saved your watch, in the sock, so it wouldn't get scratched." Grayson smiled faintly, then looked back at Elena. "I want to help," he said. "Right now. No red tape, no questions. You need a doctor. These boys need heat, food, a real bed. Please let me do something." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "I can't ask you for." "You're not asking," he cut in gently. "I'm offering. Because that boy gave me something I thought I lost a long time ago, honor, kindness, and a reason to care." She looked down at her sons, one on each side of her, and then back at the man who used to be a distant figure in a corporate tower. "Okay," she whispered, nodding. "Okay." Grayson stood and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my driver. We're taking you to a clinic I trust." "But my stuff," Aiden started. "You can bring it," Grayson said. "Everything. Especially that backpack." The boy blinked, surprised. "Really? It saved more than just a watch tonight," Grayson replied. 10 minutes later, they were in the back of a sleek black SUV. Elena leaned against the seat, finally breathing easier with the heater blowing gently across her face. Toby had fallen asleep on her lap, and Aiden sat beside Grayson, still clutching the backpack but no longer holding it like a lifeline, more like a memory. Grayson stared out the window as the city lights blurred past. So many times he had driven through these streets and never noticed who lived behind the windows or slept beneath the scaffolding. He glanced down at Aiden. "Do you like science?" Aiden looked up, surprised. "Yeah. I wanted to be an engineer once." Grayson smiled faintly. "Once? I don't know," Aiden mumbled. "Dreams don't always fit when you're trying to keep your little brother warm." Grayson's heart ached. He reached over and gently patted Aiden's backpack. "Well, let's make room for that dream again." For the first time, Aiden smiled, a real one. And for the first time in a long time, Grayson felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Grayson barely slept that night. He sat in his high-rise penthouse apartment, looking out at the New York skyline as the city buzzed far below. Yet none of that mattered anymore. Not the stocks. Not the mergers. Not the late-night calls from Tokyo or the boardroom battles in London. All he could think about were two boys, Aiden, with his guarded eyes and too thin shoulders, and little Toby, who had barely spoken a word but clung to his brother's hand like it was the only anchor he had left in the world. And then there was Elena. Her cough had echoed in Grayson's ears all night. It wasn't just a cold. He'd seen enough suffering in his early years, long before wealth shielded him from it, to know when someone was fighting to breathe. And yet, even in that small, cold apartment in the Bronx, Elena had smiled. Not for herself, but for her sons. Her eyes held gratitude, not desperation. It shook something loose inside him that he hadn't felt in years. By 6:30 a.m., Grayson was dressed in jeans and a dark wool coat, coffee in hand, waiting beside his sleek black SUV. His driver, Marcus, raised an eyebrow when he saw the billionaire opening the door for himself. "Heading to the Bronx again, sir?" Grayson nodded. "Pick up two boys and their mother. We're going to see a doctor." Marcus didn't ask questions. After all these years, he'd learned when Grayson's voice carried steel, you followed the rhythm and not the reason. In the dim hallway of their building, Aiden opened the door before Grayson even knocked. He was already dressed, though his sweatshirt had a tear at the collar and his shoes were more duct tape than fabric. Behind him, 5-year-old Toby rubbed sleep from his eyes, wrapped in a faded superhero blanket. "You really came back," Aiden whispered, as if it was hard to believe. "I said I would," Grayson replied softly. "Is your mom up?" "She's trying," Aiden said, turning to the room. "She's weak." Grayson stepped inside. The apartment was colder than he remembered. The heating must have stopped working sometime during the night. Elena lay propped up against the wall on a thin mattress. Her breathing was labored, skin pale, eyes sunken, but she smiled when she saw him. "You didn't have to come back," she rasped, her voice barely audible. Grayson knelt beside her. "Actually, I did." The private clinic sat on the east side, a gleaming tower of glass and quiet. It was the kind of place where senators got knee replacements and tech moguls froze their stem cells. Elena looked completely out of place as Marcus carefully lifted her out of the car. She tried to protest. "I can walk. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Grayson said firmly. "And I'd rather not argue." Aiden held his brother's hand tight as they entered the pristine lobby. Toby looked around with wide eyes, more curious than scared. He pointed at a potted plant nearly as tall as he was. "Is that real?" he asked. "It is," Aiden replied, his voice proud for the first time. "It's not plastic like the ones in Grandma's building." Grayson glanced at them. Even in a moment of crisis, the brothers were connected by wonder. It hurt more than he expected. Elena was taken into a consultation room within 10 minutes. Grayson pulled every favor he had, called in favors from surgeons he had funded, made private phone calls to administrators. There would be no waiting list today. Not for Elena. While they waited, the boys sat beside him on a soft leather couch. Toby had fallen asleep, head on Grayson's arm, mouth slightly open. Aiden sat upright, backpack clutched in his lap. "You don't have to stay," Aiden said suddenly. "You've already done more than anyone else ever has." Grayson looked down at the boy, this 10-year-old with too much responsibility in his eyes. "I want to stay," he replied. "Not because I feel sorry for you. But because I see you." Aiden blinked, unsure what to say to that. So he stayed silent, but didn't move away. An hour later, the doctor came out. Dr. Choi was calm, professional, but there was kindness in her eyes as she addressed Grayson first, then Aiden. "She has pneumonia," she said gently. "Severe, but treatable. It's likely been building for weeks without proper medication. She's dehydrated and anemic as well. We're admitting her for at least 3 days of observation and treatment." Aiden's voice trembled. "But she's going to be okay?" "With care, yes," Dr. Choi nodded. "She's lucky. If you hadn't brought her in today, it might have been too late." Aiden sat down heavily, shoulders shaking. Toby stirred from sleep, confused, and Aiden quickly wrapped an arm around his brother, whispering, "She's going to be okay. Mom's gonna be okay." Grayson felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't business. It wasn't logic. It was something far older, something human. They visited Elena later that day. She was in a real bed now, warm and hooked to 4 fluids, her color slowly returning. Her eyes lit up when she saw her sons. Grayson stood back, watching the reunion from the doorway. He didn't want to intrude. But then Elena looked at him, reached out a hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice clearer. "I don't know how to repay this." "You already have," Grayson said, walking to her side. "You raised a boy who wouldn't sell my watch for food. That's worth more than money." She laughed softly, then coughed. "He's a stubborn one." Grayson looked at Aiden, now holding Toby on his hip. "He's strong." He had to be. Outside the clinic, snow had begun to fall gently on the sidewalks. Grayson walked the boys back to the SUV. Aiden opened his backpack and pulled something out, a folded letter and the old wristwatch. "I never gave it back officially," he said. "I wanted to wait until I was sure you weren't just pretending." Grayson took the watch, slowly. It was the first time he had touched it since the day it slipped off in the park. It felt heavier now. Grayson couldn't say anything for a moment. "Do you two want to stay with me for a few days?" he asked. Aiden hesitated. "At your house? I've got more space than I know what to do with. Beds. Food. Hot water." Toby looked up. "And TV?" Grayson laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. "Plenty of it." Aiden studied him. He had trusted too few adults in his short life. But he saw something different in Grayson's eyes. Not pity. Not charity. Just care. He nodded. "Okay. But only if Mom says yes." "She will," Grayson replied. "She'll want you warm. And safe." And that's what he promised himself, too, that he would make sure these boys never had to carry their mother's illness, their hunger, or the weight of a broken world alone ever again. Not while he still had a name, and means, and a beating heart. Grayson Wells hadn't expected to feel so nervous standing in his own penthouse. The sleek, towering apartment had been the symbol of his power for over a decade, floor-to-ceiling glass, minimalist furniture, and a panoramic view of New York's skyline. He had closed multi-million-dollar deals here. Heads of state had dined at his marble table. Yet now, standing across from a 10-year-old boy and his 5-year-old brother, he felt something unfamiliar. Vulnerability. Aiden and Toby sat side by side on the plush white couch that likely cost more than everything they'd ever owned combined. They looked small there, Toby's feet didn't even touch the floor. Aiden held his backpack in his lap with both arms wrapped around it protectively, as though it were the only thing keeping him anchored in this new world. Grayson crouched down slowly, careful not to appear intimidating. "You said you had something you wanted to show me?" Aiden hesitated, looking to Toby, who gave a small encouraging nod. Then, with a deep breath, Aiden carefully unzipped the frayed backpack. One by one, he pulled out the contents, laying them neatly on the coffee table between them. "This is my math book. It's kind of ripped, but I still use it." Grayson's eyes followed the stained paperback with creased corners and hand-drawn multiplication tables scribbled along the margins. "This one's Toby's," Aiden added, pulling out a coloring book with broken crayons tucked into its pages. "He colors when he's scared." Toby looked down at his sneakers, then bravely added, "I like blue the best." Grayson smiled gently. "Blue's a good color." Next came a bundle of photos, each carefully wrapped in a folded t-shirt to keep them from getting bent. Aiden unfolded them, revealing images of a younger Elena, laughing at the beach, holding baby Toby in a hospital bed, Aiden blowing out candles on a 4th birthday cake. Grayson felt something tighten in his chest. She used to work in a big building. She had a badge and wore heels. Then one day she didn't anymore. But she still smiled, Aiden said, his voice growing softer. "She told us to smile too. Even when it was hard." Grayson remained quiet. He could see Elena in those photos, radiant and full of life. He remembered her as an intern, bright-eyed and idealistic. She had once stood in the lobby of his company holding a presentation folder with shaking hands, hoping for a chance. Now here were her sons, carrying the weight of her lost dreams in a threadbare bag. And then, Aiden pulled out a folded piece of paper. A long crease ran down the center, and the edges were smudged and soft from being opened and refolded so many times. It looked like it had been written carefully, deliberately. Aiden handed it to him. "I wrote this, in case we ever found the man who lost the watch. It used to be Mom's. She said it was the only nice thing she still had from the time she believed in better days." Grayson opened the letter slowly, his fingers trembling slightly. The handwriting was uneven, the letters large and deliberate, written in pencil. "Dear Sir. If you found the gold watch, thank you for not stepping on it. It's special because it belonged to our mom and it used to make her smile. We don't want anything. We're okay. Just wanted to say I hope you have someone who tells you to smile, too. My mom always did, even when it was cold and we didn't have soup. Please take care of the watch. She says it keeps time from the best part of her life. From Aiden, age 10. And Toby, age 5. Grayson couldn't speak. He looked up from the letter at the two boys now watching him closely. Aiden sat upright, proud but nervous. Toby rested his head on his brother's shoulder, sucking the corner of his sleeve. Grayson had spent his entire adult life surrounded by wealth, luxury cars, fine wines, tailored suits. But nothing he owned had ever been this pure. This letter, he finally managed, it's beautiful. And brave. Aiden looked down, embarrassed. It's not much. I just wanted. I didn't know what would happen. I thought if you were someone who would come back for something important, maybe you were someone who could be kind. Grayson lowered the letter and pressed his lips together, fighting a tide of emotion. This boy, this child, was testing the world with kindness and waiting for it to fail. And yet, he had still chosen honesty, still chosen hope. Toby fidgeted. Do you like it? I do, Grayson whispered. Very much. There was a silence then, heavy with unsaid things. Grayson suddenly saw the absurdity of it all. He, a man worth billions, sitting on the floor before two boys who had barely enough to eat, yet were offering him something priceless, a chance at humanity. Aiden began packing the items back into the bag. We don't need a lot. Just a place where Mom can get better. She always says we're lucky we have each other. Grayson leaned forward. You have more than each other now. You have me, too. Aiden's hands froze. Toby tilted his head. Like, forever? Grayson nodded. If you'll let me. Aiden bit his lip, the weight of the moment sinking into his chest. Then he asked, very seriously, why? Grayson didn't have a polished answer. No business pitch. No rehearsed speech. Just the truth. Because once, someone gave me everything and asked for nothing back. My father. He gave me the watch I lost. But I didn't really understand what it meant until tonight. He looked at Aiden. Your mom gave you values. You didn't let go of them, even when life tried to take everything. That's something most adults forget. Aiden's throat tightened. Toby slid off the couch and climbed into Grayson's lap without warning, wrapping his little arms around his neck. You smell like cinnamon, he said softly. Grayson let out a breath and laughed, surprised. I think that's the pancakes from breakfast. I like pancakes, Toby murmured sleepily. Aiden watched the scene and slowly, carefully, allowed the backpack to slide off his shoulder. He placed it on the floor beside Grayson. You can hold it if you want, he offered. Just for a while. Grayson reached over, touched the bag gently. It was light, worn, patched with blue tape on one side, but it felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 silent sacrifices. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. In that quiet room, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't just about a watch. Or a letter. Or even the backpack. It was about trust. It was about choosing love in a world that often forgot how to offer it. And for the first time in many years, Grayson Wells didn't feel like the richest man in the room. He simply felt home. The soft hum of the elevator was the only sound as it climbed to the executive floor of Wells Enterprises. Grayson Wells stood silently, staring at his reflection in the mirrored doors. His tie felt too tight, his thoughts tangled. It had been a long time since he'd walked through these halls feeling something other than ambition or cold determination. But today was different. Today, he wasn't just a CEO. He was a man trying to right a wrong. He stepped into the hallway, his polished shoes echoing on the marble floor. The receptionist looked up and blinked in disbelief. Grayson usually entered through the private garage. But this visit wasn't about image or convenience. He walked into the HR department, pausing at the threshold. Behind the desk sat Mr. Lampert, the head of recruitment, an old-school type with a clipboard always in hand and an aversion to change. Grayson's presence caused him to sit up straighter, the clipboard trembling slightly. I need Elena Rivera reinstated, Grayson said simply. Lampert adjusted his glasses. Elena Rivera? From years ago? She was an intern. She was let go under someone else's decision. I want her rehired, immediately. Full salary. Full benefits. Give her an admin role to start, flexible hours. And make sure she has support. Lampert looked like he'd swallowed a marble. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Grayson didn't smile. He turned and left without further explanation. He had somewhere else to be. 3 days earlier, Elena had been curled up on a cot in a frigid one-room apartment, trying to keep her 2 sons warm with a threadbare blanket and body heat. She hadn't expected to see Grayson Wells again, not after being dismissed from his company all those years ago, not after the economy collapsed around her and the job offers stopped coming. She certainly hadn't expected him to walk into that room like a ghost from a past life, holding Aiden's hand, asking if she needed help. But help had come. And it had come fast. Grayson arranged for a team to pack up their belongings, what little they had, and move them to a small, sunlit apartment in Midtown. It wasn't extravagant, but it had heat, clean sheets, and windows that actually locked. For the first time in months, Aiden and Toby didn't have to share a single pillow. On their first night there, Grayson showed up with a box of takeout. Elena was too stunned to speak, and Aiden, always the protector, stood guard while little Toby ran in circles shouting, "We have a couch." Over dinner, Grayson asked questions. About their routines. Their needs. Their dreams. "I want to be an engineer," Aiden had said quietly, barely meeting his eyes. "I like to build things. I fix stuff. Like your watch." Grayson didn't speak right away. He just nodded. Then he turned to Toby and asked what he wanted to be. "I want pancakes," Toby declared, his face sticky with sauce. Grayson laughed for the first time in days. Now, as Elena stood outside the building that once let her go, her hand trembled against the polished brass door handle. Aiden held her left hand, and Toby clung to her coat with the other, his face buried in the fabric. "You don't have to do this, Mama," Aiden said, sensing her anxiety. She looked down at her sons and smiled. "Yes. I do." Grayson was waiting for them in the lobby. He was dressed impeccably, as always, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that Elena hadn't remembered from before. Maybe it had always been there, buried under layers of armor. "Ready?" he asked. Elena nodded. "I think so." He led them upstairs, personally walked her through the office, introduced her to her new team, and gave her a card with his private number. "If anyone gives you trouble," he said, "you call me. No excuses." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "Grayson. I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he said quietly, nodding toward Aiden and Toby. "You raised them right." Back at the new apartment that afternoon, Grayson sat with Aiden at the dining table, papers spread out in front of them. "These are your scholarship forms," he explained. "It's not charity. It's an investment." "In me?" Aiden asked. "Yes," Grayson said. "In you." Aiden's fingers trembled slightly as he signed the form with his full name, Aiden Rivera. A name that would now be listed in the school records of a prestigious academy just 3 blocks away. "And what about me?" Toby asked, not to be forgotten. Grayson reached under the table and pulled out a small backpack with race cars printed on it. Inside was a set of beginner learning books and a note that read, "Toby's Engineering Academy, coming soon." Toby squealed and hugged his leg. Later that evening, Grayson stood at the window of his penthouse, watching the city lights flicker. He had spent years climbing the ladder, gaining wealth, power, and influence. But none of it had prepared him for the feeling that now warmed his chest, like something long lost had finally returned. His father's watch sat on the counter beside him, no longer just a relic, but a symbol. It had been broken, lost, and returned, not by a security guard, not by a manager, but by a 10-year-old boy with no home and more honor than half the executives Grayson had ever known. He reached for his phone. "Hey, Elena," he said when she picked up. "I've been thinking. There's a lot more we could do with your story. I want to start a new mentorship program for single parents. Maybe name it after your boys. What do you think?" There was silence on the other end. Then a sniffle. I think you've already changed our lives." But if you want to change more, I'll help you. He smiled. We'll change them together. A week later, Elena walked into her new office. On the wall outside the door, a bronze plaque gleamed in the morning sun. The Rivera Initiative, a second chance for families who never gave up. And beneath it, in smaller lettering. Inspired by Aiden, Toby, and a backpack full of integrity. She turned around to see her boys running toward her in their new school uniforms, laughing and shouting. Grayson stood at the end of the hall, coffee in hand, watching them with a pride that went far beyond blood. Sometimes, second chances don't knock. Sometimes, they wait quietly in a small backpack, tucked beneath a park bench, held by tiny hands that never stopped believing. And when someone is brave enough to answer that silent call, everything, absolutely everything, can change. It began with a single photo, snapped in the quiet hum of a hospital corridor on an early spring morning. A nurse named Carla, who had been working the night shift, had seen many things in her years, loss, recovery, hopelessness, and miracles, but nothing quite like what unfolded that dawn. Grayson Wells, the famously unreachable billionaire known for dodging both press and personal involvement, stood at the end of the hallway. His designer coat was gone. In its place, he wore faded jeans and a dark gray hoodie, zipped halfway over a wrinkled t-shirt. But that wasn't what caught Carla's attention. It was the two boys walking beside him. Aiden, 10 years old, held his younger brother Toby's hand tightly in his own. Toby, just 5, wore a coat 2 sizes too big and mismatched gloves, one pink and one gray. He clutched a small juice box someone had handed him earlier, his tired eyes wide as he took in the sterile, white-lit hallway. Grayson walked slowly beside them, one hand resting gently on Aiden's shoulder. In his other hand, he carried something that didn't seem to belong, a small, worn-out backpack. Its fabric was faded, the zippers rusted, and there were hand-stitched patches where holes had formed. Carla couldn't help herself. She lifted her phone and captured the moment, the billionaire, the brothers, and that tiny backpack, cradled like it held the weight of the world. The caption came later, after she'd debated for hours about posting it. But the words came to her easily in the end. Sometimes a big heart hides behind a small bag. The image went viral overnight. By morning, headlines blazed across every news site and blog. Grayson Wells breaks silence, the billionaire with a heart. Who are the backpack boys and why did they melt America's coldest CEO? Mystery family, miracle moment, the photo that changed everything. Grayson's PR team had been the first to see it. Phones buzzed. Emails flooded. Social media exploded. But Grayson was still at the clinic. He sat in a quiet waiting room with Aiden curled up beside him on the couch, head resting on his shoulder. Toby had finally fallen asleep in his lap, his little fingers still grasping the drawstring of that ragged backpack. Grayson stared at them, heart aching with something unfamiliar and powerful. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It wasn't even pity. It was something deeper. A quiet realization that he had once lived in a world of glass towers and gold cufflinks, while these boys who had nothing, had somehow carried more courage and kindness in that backpack than he had in all his bank vaults. When his assistant finally reached him with a panicked, "Sir, it's everywhere," he barely flinched. "I figured," Grayson muttered, his voice calm. "Let it be." That surprised everyone. For years, Grayson had been known to sue at the hint of unauthorized photos. But now he sat with a sleeping child in each arm, watching the photo light up the world, and all he could think was, maybe people need to see this. Elena, their mother, was improving. After days of treatment and rest, she had finally managed to sit upright. She cried when she saw the photo, not from shame, but from pride. "That's my boys," she whispered, voice hoarse. "And that man, he saved us." She wasn't talking about money or hospitals. She meant something else. The moment Grayson returned that watch, untouched and unclaimed, to his wrist, and Aiden had said, Mom told us never to take what isn't ours, everything changed. Toby had followed his big brother faithfully, even when it meant sleeping under a bridge or skipping dinner so Aiden could eat. They had trusted their mother's teachings even in the darkest days. And that, somehow, had brought them here. The world couldn't get enough of the story. One segment on a national morning show played a loop of Carla's photo while narrators speculated about Grayson's change of heart. Another talk show even invited experts to discuss whether this was a publicity stunt or a redemption arc. But for Grayson, it wasn't about image. It was about healing something broken. Reporters camped outside his building. Paparazzi tried to follow his car. He had never been more famous, and he had never cared less. What he cared about was the way Aiden now smiled with both his mouth and his eyes, and how Toby had stopped flinching every time someone new walked into the room. It was the small things, sharing pancakes with them in the morning, hearing Elena hum an old lullaby as she cooked, watching the boys race each other in the hallway, their laughter echoing off marble floors that had once felt sterile and cold. That backpack, still patched and faded, sat on a shelf in his study. Grayson refused to replace it. "It holds more than just things," he told Elena one evening. "It held your boys' honesty. Their story. Their strength." Elena smiled gently. "It also held a sandwich Toby didn't want to share," she laughed softly. "But I think he's learning." Eventually, Grayson issued a public statement, not to deny or spin the story, but to honor it. In a televised interview, he said, "That watch reminded me of who I was. But Aiden and Toby reminded me of who I could still be. They didn't need my money. They needed to know someone still believed in them. And I needed to remember what trust looked like." He paused, then added, "Sometimes you meet people who change your story in ways you never saw coming. These boys did that for me. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure they have every chance to write their own." The interviewer wiped away a tear. So did half the audience. Soon after, Grayson launched the Backpack Promise, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting homeless families, focusing on dignity, education, and long-term housing. The first scholarship granted went to Aiden, who had told Grayson he wanted to be someone who fixes broken things. Like watches. Or people. Toby, ever the joker, added, "I just want to own a whole pizza. Just for me." Grayson chuckled. "We'll start with that." 1 year later, another photo made the rounds. This one wasn't taken secretly. It was planned. Grayson, wearing the same hoodie, knelt beside Aiden and Toby in front of the first shelter funded by the Backpack Promise. Elena stood beside them, smiling with a strength that only a mother who's been through hell and back can wear. The backpack? Still there, slung proudly over Toby's shoulder, stitched once more with a red patch that said, "Home." And this time, the caption read, "He gave them a chance. They gave him a purpose." Every evening now ended the same way, and for Grayson Wells, it was nothing short of extraordinary. The soft clinking of cutlery, Toby's giggles over mashed potatoes shaped like smiley faces, Aiden's thoughtful questions about the world, questions Grayson hadn't even asked himself in decades, and Elena's laughter, warm and real, had become the new rhythm of his life. For years, Grayson had lived in silence. His penthouse, towering over Manhattan's skyline, was once a place of stillness, untouched plates on polished counters, and views that no longer impressed him. He had built empires with contracts and crushed rivals with a word, but none of it filled the void left by his father's death and his own detachment from the world. That was before a lost watch, before a backpack, before 2 boys and their mother walked into his life and turned it right side up. Now, the scent of home-cooked meals floated through rooms that once smelled only of polish and dust. The glossy, lifeless dining table where Grayson used to sign multi-million-dollar contracts now had drawings taped to it, Toby scribbled superheroes and Aiden surprisingly precise sketches of engines and bridges. Grayson had begun to clear space in his life, and not just physically. The emotional clutter, the guilt, the loneliness, the belief that his world was too rigid to bend, had started to fade. That evening, Elena stood at the kitchen island, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her health had improved drastically since the pneumonia scare. After weeks of proper care and nutrition, the color had returned to her cheeks, and the exhaustion had begun to lift from her eyes. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled as she watched Grayson sitting cross-legged on the rug, Toby in his lap, listening intently as the boy told a story about a magical train that flew through clouds and talked in rhymes. "I call it the dream train," Toby said, holding up a piece of paper. "It takes people where their hearts feel safe." Grayson's voice caught for a second before he whispered, "I think I've just boarded it, kiddo." Aiden, perched at the edge of the couch, looked up from his book. "Do you really like it here, Mr. Grayson? Or are you just being nice to us because of what happened?" Grayson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood, picked up Toby, who protested with a giggle, and walked to Aiden. He sat down beside the boy, resting one hand on his shoulder. "I didn't know I could miss a life I'd never lived," Grayson finally said. "But I missed this. I missed you. All of you. And I didn't even know it." Aiden's lower lip trembled. It was the first time someone had spoken to him like that. Not like he was a burden, or a charity case, or just another kid trying to survive the city's cold corners, but like he mattered. Like his existence made someone else's world better. "Do you mean we're staying?" Aiden asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grayson didn't hesitate. "You're not guests. You're family now." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. She had been holding that breath for weeks, afraid to hope. She had told herself not to depend on kindness, especially from someone so powerful and distant. But Grayson had never once made them feel small. He never dangled his wealth like a leash or demanded anything in return for what he gave. He listened. He asked. He remembered. He cared. They had once lived in fear of being found, of being left behind, of becoming invisible. But Grayson had done the most powerful thing someone like him could do, he saw them. Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Toby curled into Aiden's side with his hand still gripping his brother's hoodie. Elena stepped onto the penthouse balcony. Grayson stood there already, a glass of water in hand, staring out over the glittering city. "They're sleeping?" he asked without turning. "Like angels," she replied softly. "They trust you." He turned then. "Do you?" Elena hesitated. Not because she didn't, but because trust had always come at a price. But Grayson had never asked for more than she could give. And more than anything, he had shown her what a second chance truly looked like. "I'm learning to," she said honestly. "And that's more than I've been able to say in a long time." He smiled at that, slow, quiet, content. Then he reached behind him and picked up a framed display, handing it to her. It was the watch. His father's watch. Now cleaned and carefully set behind glass. Next to it, a letter. Handwritten. In Aiden's unmistakably careful print. "Dear Sir. If you are reading this, I found something that belongs to you. I didn't take it, I just kept it safe. My mom says we don't take what isn't ours, even if we need it bad. I hope you find it, and I hope you're nice. From Aiden, age 10. Elena clutched the frame, her eyes stinging. "I didn't know what to do with it at first," Grayson said. "But I realized, it's not just about the watch. It's about what it survived. What it witnessed. It came back to me through your son's integrity. And I want the world to remember that." She looked up at him, confused. "I'm launching a foundation," he continued. "The Backpack Trust. Named after Aiden's bag. It'll help kids who fall through the cracks, just like he almost did. Kids with good hearts and impossible odds." Elena gasped. "You're serious?" He nodded. And I want you to run it. Her breath caught. Me? You've lived it. You've fought through it. And you have the compassion that I never had until I met you. Tears spilled down Elena's face as she shook her head, overwhelmed. Grayson, I don't know what to say. Then don't, he said. Just say yes. She looked at the watch, the letter, and then back at him. Yes. The official launch of the Backpack Trust took place on a rainy spring afternoon, symbolic, Elena thought. Rain had once meant shelterless nights, cold toes, and fear. But now it meant renewal. Aiden stood beside Grayson on stage, dressed in a little suit he didn't quite fit into, with his wild hair combed down as best as possible. Toby was in Elena's lap in the front row, holding a mini American flag someone had handed him, which he promptly used as a makeshift airplane. When Grayson gave his speech, he didn't talk about profits or projections. He didn't speak of boardroom triumphs or business empires. Instead, he told the story of a lost watch, and a boy with a small backpack. He ended with, sometimes the biggest change comes in the smallest package. I lost something valuable, but I found something priceless. The applause was thunderous. Back home, that evening was quiet again. Just the five of them, Grayson, Elena, Aiden, Toby, and the future. Toby had fallen asleep on the couch with a piece of cornbread still in his hand. Aiden was building something with Legos that looked suspiciously like a model of the Empire State Building. Elena was journaling, something Grayson had encouraged her to do to process everything they'd been through. And Grayson? He was just watching. Just taking it in. His phone buzzed with a new business proposal. He ignored it. Instead, he picked up a crayon and sat beside Aiden. Need help with the top floors? Aiden grinned. Only if you promise not to knock it over this time. Deal. As they built, piece by piece, block by block, Grayson thought about the foundation of everything that mattered now. Not wealth. Not status. But moments like this. Chosen family. Earned trust. Love without condition. He looked at Aiden. He looked at Toby, who snored softly. He looked at Elena, who met his gaze and smiled, eyes brimming with peace. This was legacy. And it had all started with a backpack. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.